Hello everyone, have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from BLACKRIDGE Stories, and have a good night's sleep. If you find these stories interesting, please give me a subscribe and comment. Thank you very much everyone, and now welcome to part 1 of the story, Ghosts of the Big Bend Mountains. The sun had barely dipped beneath the jagged peaks of the Big Bend Mountains when the group of 5 hikers reached the narrow canyon that would be their final checkpoint before nightfall. The red-orange cliffs glowed under the last blush of daylight, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch and move even as the world held its breath in silence. They were experienced trekkers, Claire, Jackson, Tessa, Amir, and Lucas, drawn to this remote corner of the Texas wilderness by its haunting beauty and, for some, the whispered legend surrounding it. Claire, an anthropology major, had read about the native tribes who once lived here. How many were cast out by settlers, left to die in the mountains? Some said their spirits never left. They laughed at those stories when they packed up in El Paso. But now, as the sky turned indigo and the air grew sharp and unnervingly still, something in the group shifted. That night, they set up camp near a dry riverbed. Stars glittered above like pinpricks in velvet, and the silence was almost unnatural. No crickets, no owls, no rustling leaves, just stillness. Then came the footsteps. At first, it was soft, like someone pacing just beyond the glow of their campfire. Jackson stood up with a flashlight and swept a beam around the trees. Nothing. You heard that, right? Tessa asked, her voice tight. Probably an animal, Lucas muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Later that night, Claire was the first awake. She didn't know what stirred her, only that the air felt wrong, thicker, colder, heavier. She sat up and saw movement near the edge of camp. A figure, tall, dark, unmoving. "Jackson," she whispered. The figure didn't respond. She reached for her flashlight and flicked it on. In that instant, the figure vanished. Not stepped away, not ran, simply blinked out. The next morning, Lucas was gone. His tent was empty, zipper open, boots still inside. They searched the area for hours, calling his name, tracing possible paths. No sign, no tracks, just a lingering sense of dread. Amir wanted to hike back to the ranger station, but Claire, driven by something between fear and fascination, insisted on continuing, just one more night. She was convinced something ancient watched them, and she wanted to know what it was. They moved deeper into the canyon, the path narrowing, cliffs looming above like jagged fangs. The further they went, the colder it became, despite the desert heat. Shadows seemed to move on their own. Shapes flickered at the corners of their eyes. That night, everything unraveled. Amir vanished first. One moment he was there, sitting near the fire, sipping from his canteen. Then he stood to relieve himself behind a boulder and never came back. Tessa screamed when they found his canteen still sitting on the rock, untouched. Jackson, now white-faced and sweating, demanded they leave at dawn. But dawn never came, when the sun should have risen. The canyon remained shrouded in twilight. No bird sang, no wind blew. It was as if time had slowed or broken. They tried retracing their steps, but found the path looping back in impossible ways. Landmarks repeating, trees appearing in the same positions. That night, Claire woke to a whisper. It was low, melodic, almost like a chant. Not in English, not in any language she knew, but it stirred something deep inside her, like grief, like longing. She followed the sound, stepping barefoot through the cold dust. The air grew thicker. Around her, the shadows moved. She reached a clearing, a ring of stones, charred at its center. There in the moonlight, she saw them. Figures, dozens of them, dressed in traditional garments of the long-gone tribes, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in soundless screams. And in their center was Lucas, his face serene, standing as if part of their ritual. She ran. When she returned to camp, only Jackson was left, and his eyes were wild. "They showed me," he muttered. "The memories, the betrayal, the death." Claire didn't ask what he meant. They packed up in silence and began walking again, anywhere, just moving. By midday, Jackson stopped. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "They're here." Then he vanished, right in front of her. Gone. Claire ran. She didn't know how far, how long. Just through rocks, over ravines, blood on her legs from cuts and falls. Finally, as night swallowed the world again, she found a ridge that overlooked the canyon, and she saw it. Below, not visible on any map or satellite image, was a village. Ghostly fires flickered, shadows danced, and there, kneeling in a circle, with a friend she had lost, Claire collapsed. She was found 2 days later by a search party, dazed, frostbitten, muttering a language no one understood. She never returned to Big Bend, but she often drew circles, hundreds of them, carved into her desk, scratched into her arms, and late at night, she still hears the chant, whispers of the forgotten. The ghosts of the Big Bend Mountains never let go. Welcome to part 2 of the story, Ghosts Within the Old Fortress of San Antonio. They say the air hangs heavier around the old fortress walls in San Antonio, especially after midnight. The building, once a Spanish mission, later a battlefield, still stands stoic and weathered, as if trying to forget the screams carved into its stone. But the walls remember. Tourists flock to it during the day, snapping photos, hearing guides recount the bloody days of the Alamo. But come nightfall, something else takes over, something the brochures won't mention. Whispers, footsteps, breaths not your own. Eleanor had never believed in ghosts. A pragmatic woman, she taught American history and had a particular fascination with the Battle of the Alamo. It was the courage of those who died, the hopeless stand against overwhelming odds, that intrigued her. So when she got the opportunity to attend a weekend lecture at the historical site itself, she couldn't resist. The first night passed uneventfully. She stayed at a small inn just blocks from the fortress. But on the second evening, she decided to sneak back after the official tour ended. She wanted to walk the grounds alone, to feel history under her feet. The gates had long closed, but the side access used by staff was still unlatched. She slipped in quietly, flashlight in hand, careful not to alert the guard who patrolled the main entrance. Inside the mission courtyard, the air felt wrong. The heat of the Texas evening lingered, yet a cold breeze brushed the back of her neck. She shivered and turned around, no one. Her footsteps echoed louder than expected on the stone path. The buildings loomed around her, silent and dark, like sleeping giants who might wake at any moment. She made her way into the chapel ruins, one of the few parts still partially intact. The stone archways cast long, crooked shadows across the floor. As she stepped inside, her flashlight flickered once, then steadied. She stopped listening. Somewhere deeper in the shadows came the unmistakable clink of metal, like a blade touching stone. She turned. No one. Another sound followed, low, rhythmic, breathing, but ragged, as though someone were dying, their lungs heavy with blood. "Hello," she called, forcing calm into her voice. No response. She took a cautious step forward, and that's when she saw it. Near the altar, partially hidden behind a collapsed column, was a figure, dressed in what looked like an old military uniform, torn and burned. The man knelt, clutching something to his chest. His head was bowed and long. Matted hair fell over his face. She raised her flashlight. "Sir, are you all right?" The figure didn't move, but something around him did. The air itself shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt, only it was cold. Her skin erupted in goosebumps. Then the man exhaled loud pain. Eleanor stepped back instinctively. The figure slowly raised his head. His face was wrong. It was human, but pallid and hollow. His eyes black voids that didn't reflect the light. Dried blood trailed down his temple. His mouth opened, and a hoarse whisper escaped. Back to the walls." Eleanor stumbled out of the chapel, nearly falling over broken stones. Behind her, she heard it again, metal scraping, dozens of boots stomping. But when she turned, nothing was there. Nothing but cold shadows and echoes of a battle long lost. She made it back to the inn, shaken. That night, sleep didn't come. The walls of her room creaked with voices she couldn't place. Soft thuds echoed above her bed, though no one was in the room above. The next day, she confronted the lecture host, an older historian named Dr. Ruiz. "There are things here," she whispered to him after the presentation. "I saw a man in the chapel. He said something about the walls." Dr. Ruiz didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have gone in alone," he said. "You saw one of them, the defenders. They say the men who died during the siege still walked that ground. They were never buried properly. Most burned in the aftermath, bones lost to ash." Eleanor stared at him, unable to speak. "They don't mean harm," he added, "but they can't rest. Every night, they replay the end, waiting for reinforcements that never came." That night, Eleanor stayed away, but she wasn't spared. At precisely 2:17 a.m., she awoke to the unmistakable sound of drums, not from the street, inside her room. She sat up, heart thudding. The sound was dull, distant, like war drums being pounded through thick walls. Then came the footsteps. Marching, she stood, backed against the door. The air turned icy. Her breath misted. And then nothing. Silence. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, no messages. Just a blank screen and a battery draining rapidly. When she looked back up, she saw it, written in fog on her window. "Remember, U.S." By morning, she left San Antonio, but the memory lingered. Even now, years later, Eleanor finds herself drawn back to the sound of drums and silence. Sometimes, when she walks past old stone walls or hears the clang of metal, her spine stiffens, because she knows some spirits don't rest. They wait each night within the fortress walls for the enemy that already came and the salvation that never did. Welcome to part 3 of the story, The Vengeful Spirit of Palo Duro. They say the canyons of Palo Duro whisper your name before they take you. By day, the sun lights the red rock cliffs, painting them with a rugged, majestic beauty. But when dusk settles and shadows stretch long across the valley, the air changes. Locals don't wander the trails after dark. They've heard too many stories. Stories of footsteps that don't belong to the living, and cries that don't belong to any animal still breathing. Tom Keller didn't care much for legends. He was a hunter, a man of the wild, and had roamed through nearly every part of Texas. When someone at the bar dared him to camp alone in the heart of Palo Duro for a weekend, he didn't even hesitate. "Hell, I'll bring back a trophy while I'm at it," he boasted, half drunk and overconfident. Friday afternoon, he drove into the park, deep into the canyon where cell signals faded and the world felt ancient. He set up camp at a spot far off the designated paths, beyond the warning signs. The wind carried only silence and something else, a low, rhythmic chant, so faint he thought it was just his imagination. That night, under a sky spattered with stars, he heard the first scream. It wasn't an animal. It was human. It was rage. He sat up in his tent, rifle in hand. The fire outside had nearly gone out, but its dying embers revealed something off. Footprints, dozens of them, barefoot, surrounding the camp, pointing inward. No sound, no motion, just the cold realization that he was not alone. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough. Nothing answered. The prints were gone by morning. Tom shook it off. "Just some local punks," he muttered, though his hand stayed near the rifle all day. He hiked deep into the canyons, past petroglyphs etched into the rocks, symbols of sun gods, warriors, and death masks. He mocked them under his breath. "Primitive graffiti," he scoffed. Then he shot a deer. It wasn't clean. The creature limped into the brush, blood trailing behind it. He followed. That's when he saw the figure. At first, he thought it was another hiker, someone dressed in ceremonial gear for a reenactment maybe. But the man stood completely still at the edge of a narrow trail, wearing a war paint mask made of bone white and deep red, long black hair tangled with feathers. His chest was bare, covered in scars and ash. Tom raised his rifle. "Hey, what the hell are you doing out here?" The figure didn't move. Then his eyes opened. They were pitch black. A sudden gust of wind hit Tom, so hard he stumbled backward. Dust flew into his face, blinding him for a second. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He returned to camp shaken. That night, the whispering began. Not outside. Inside the tent. low murmurs in a language he didn't understand. They sounded angry, cold, hollow. His flashlight began to flicker. The fire pit relit itself in a sudden burst, though he hadn't touched it. And then came the chanting, drums, war cries, and a scream so loud and guttural it made his ears ring. He ran out of the tent, heart pounding. The fire roared, and in the light stood the same warrior. But now he was closer. His body shimmered like smoke, and his mouth moved silently, mouthing words Tom didn't know, but somehow understood. You took blood on sacred land. Tom fired. The bullet went through the figure, but the warrior didn't vanish. He moved, not like a man, like a shadow breaking reality, shifting forward in unnatural jerks. One step, two, then a blur. Tom turned to run, stumbling through cactus and brush. His lungs burned. His legs ached. He didn't remember how he got back to the car, or how it was already morning. But his gear was gone, his campsite ashes, and his arm deeply burned, as if gripped by something not entirely human. The park rangers found him at the entrance, dehydrated and raving. He spoke of spirits, wore drums, and black eyes in the night. They said he was just another case of exposure-induced hallucination, but his left arm never healed properly. Even years later, it bears the handprint of a grip too large for any man. Tom never hunted again, and now, when others dare each other to camp near the canyon petroglyphs, the old ranger tells his story. Don't bleed on that land, he warns. Don't mock the dead, because the warrior is still there, watching, waiting, and to him, you are the invader. Welcome to part 4 of the story, The Echoing House. Houston, Texas, when Marcus and Evelyn Ramsey bought the Victorian-era home nestled in one of Houston's oldest neighborhoods, they thought they had found a hidden gem. Built in 1894, it had wraparound porches, stained glass windows, and carved woodwork that reminded Evelyn of Southern Gothic novels. The price was oddly reasonable, almost suspiciously so, but the couple chalked it up to luck and a motivated seller. They moved in mid-September. The air was thick with humidity, and the house creaked with the weight of 100 years. The neighbors were polite, but oddly quiet about the house's history. One elderly woman across the street only muttered, "That house has long memories," before retreating into her doorway. The first week passed uneventfully. Marcus worked remotely from his study, and Evelyn, a painter, was enamored with the attic studio's lighting. But on the 7th night, things began to change. It started with the doors. At 3:17 a.m., they both awoke to a soft click as their bedroom door slowly creaked open. No wind, no draft, just the slow, deliberate movement of the knob turning by itself. Marcus checked the locks. All doors and windows were sealed. Old house. Shifts in the wood, he said. Evelyn didn't argue. But that night, she painted something strange. 2 figures standing in the hallway. A man and a woman, both pale, formal, their eyes just faint shadows. She didn't remember choosing to paint them. The brush moved like it was guided. The next night, they heard footsteps. Not above them, not below them, inside their room. Soft, measured, barefoot. Marcus sat up, heart thudding. He flipped on the bedside lamp. Empty. He checked the hallway. Still nothing. But Evelyn pointed toward the window. The glass had fogged, despite the warm night. And there, drawn with a fingertip, were 2 hearts joined by a line. They didn't sleep after that. Evelyn started digging into the house's history. She found an old newspaper, clipping from 1928. A couple named Harold and Clara Winslow had lived and died there. The article was brief. Tragedy in Montrose home. Young couple found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Neighbors report screaming and broken glass. Authorities say it may have been related to jealousy or betrayal. Evelyn felt the temperature in the room drop as she read it. Behind her, the wooden floor creaked softly, like someone was reading over her shoulder. That night, Evelyn dreamt of Clara, a woman in a long nightgown, face bruised, eyes hollow. She stood at the foot of their bed and whispered, "He lied to me, and now I stay." Evelyn woke up gasping. Marcus was staring at the ceiling, frozen. "I heard her voice," he said. "They decided to leave the bedroom door open that night. hoping transparency would make them feel safer. It only made things worse. Around 3 a.m., a hallway light flickered on by itself. They heard voices, a man and a woman arguing, first muffled, then clearer, then inside their room. The man: "You promised. You said you loved me." The woman: "You killed us. I never meant." Crash. A picture frame fell from the wall, glass shattering across the floor. They didn't find it broken in the morning. It was neatly set on the dresser, upright. But now, their own wedding photo was missing. Instead, the same frame held a sepia-toned photo of Harold and Clara Winslow. In the kitchen, cabinets began slamming shut every morning at 3:17. In the attic, Evelyn's paints were rearranged each night, always forming two figures, red, black, and bone white. No matter what she tried to paint, the same couple emerged. One evening, Marcus entered the attic to find "Get Out" painted in thick crimson strokes on the floor. Evelyn swore she didn't do it. They set up cameras. Nothing appeared. The recordings went static every night from 3:15 to 3:30, until one night, when a faint whisper broke through the static. "This was our home first." It was Clara's voice. Evelyn knew it deep in her bones. Marcus began acting differently, distant, moody. He sometimes stood in the hallway staring at nothing, whispering under his breath. Evelyn caught him once standing in front of the mirror, mouthing words silently, his reflection slightly off, smiling when he wasn't. She begged him to leave the house with her. He refused. That night, Evelyn dreamt of the murder. She was Clara. She felt the rage, the betrayal, the fear, the blade. She woke with scratches down her arm. Marcus had no explanation. She tried to leave the house the next morning, but her car wouldn't start. The doors all jammed. And Marcus, gone. She found him in the basement, talking to no one. "I can fix it," he said. "I can end the cycle." He was holding a knife. She ran. She ran to the attic, where the air was thick and suffocating, where the paintings now showed not two, but four figures. Two couples, blurred, melting into each other. A loud bang echoed below. Marcus never came up, and when the police arrived, they found Evelyn in the attic, catatonic, surrounded by portraits of people who had never been painted. There was no sign of Marcus, no fingerprints, only a faint, old photograph left on the floor. Harold and Clara, and behind them, two blurred figures in the hallway, watching. The house was put back on the market. The next buyers marveled at the craftsmanship. The real estate agent simply smiled and said, "It has a lot of character." And if you walk by the house late at night, you might hear soft arguing. A man and a woman, reliving their last night, forever. Welcome to part 5 of the story, The Forgotten Grave, Lubbock, Texas. It began as a dare for Texas Tech University students. Rachel, Miguel, Amber, and Carter had heard about the old cemetery just outside Lubbock, long abandoned and nearly hidden beneath overgrowth and dust. According to local legend, buried somewhere on the outskirts of that crumbling graveyard was the Queen of Dust, a woman never named, but rumored to have cursed the land in the late 1800s. They went on a Friday evening, laughing, armed with flashlights, phone cameras, and snacks, more amused than afraid. "We'll find the Queen, take a selfie, and post it." Instant legend, Amber said. The iron gate groaned as they pushed through. The cemetery was smaller than they expected. About 20 visible headstones, many cracked or leaning. The air smelled dry, yet heavy, like something long buried had recently stirred. They split up, poking through the brush and vines. It was Rachel who found the grave, half buried in dead grass, surrounded by a ring of thorny weeds that grew in a perfect circle. Was a flat stone slab with no name. Just a single, barely legible word etched in worn Gothic script. Reina. "Queen," Miguel muttered, in Spanish. Rachel felt a sudden chill crawl down her spine. They all gathered around it, snapping photos, joking about uploading it to TikTok, with creepy music. But Amber, bold as ever, knelt down and brushed her fingers across the stone. "Hey, Your Majesty," she said, giggling. "You still haunting this dump?" The wind stopped. The air went completely still. Then, from deep inside the cemetery, came a sound that didn't belong. A soft, rhythmic whispering, like dozens of voices reciting something in unison. Too faint to understand. Amber froze. "I was just kidding," she said quickly, standing up. "Guys, Miguel was filming it all. Do you hear that?" Rachel turned in a slow circle. The whispering was all around them. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. They left quickly. That night, Rachel woke up choking. She dreamt of soil, coarse and dry, being forced into her mouth. In the dream, her arms were pinned to her sides, her chest pressed by invisible weight, and a voice kept whispering in her ear, "Remember me." Over the next few days, they all began to experience things. Amber started losing time. Hours gone with no memory. She'd find dirt beneath her fingernails, even though she hadn't gone outside. Miguel's phone, used to film the grave, developed glitches. The video of the Queen's grave had vanished, replaced with static and brief flashes of a woman's pale face with hollow eyes. Carter began sleepwalking. Once, his roommate found him in the campus library, standing in front of an old Texas history book, chanting something in Latin. Carter claimed he'd never studied Latin in his life. Rachel kept dreaming of the grave. In each dream, the woman beneath it rose higher. First a whisper, then a figure in a black shroud, face obscured by a crown of thorns and rusted metal. One evening, Rachel visited the university archives, desperate for information. She found an old article from 1889. Unmarked woman buried on outskirts of Lubbock. Locals fear strange occurrences tied to self-proclaimed Queen of the Dead Plains. Known for hexes, whispers, and blood rites. It mentioned her being buried with a lead coffin and iron chains, measures meant to keep her influence bound to the earth. But the chains were likely gone now. Amber disappeared 2 days later. Her car was found abandoned near the same cemetery. The driver's door wide open, her phone inside, still recording. The last thing on the video was a low humming, then static. Miguel stopped coming to class. When Rachel visited his apartment, she found strange drawings covering the walls, symbols, faces, words in dead languages. Miguel was in the center of the room, carving into his own arm with a piece of broken glass, whispering, "She's waking up. She's remembering." He was taken to a psychiatric facility. Only Carter and Rachel remained. And then Rachel found the note. It was in her backpack, scrawled on yellowed paper that smelled like earth. "Queen forgotten is a queen enraged. You laughed. You touched her throne. Now you will kneel." Carter tried to leave Lubbock, driving west through the desert. His car was found wrecked by the roadside, doors torn open. No blood, no body, just a pile of dirt in the driver's seat. Rachel was alone. She returned to the grave at dusk, compelled by something she no longer questioned. The cemetery was silent, but the grave was no longer half buried. It had risen. Cracks had formed in the ground around it, like something underneath had pressed upward. Rachel placed her hand on the stone. Cold surged through her, and her vision blackened. She was in a chamber, underground. The woman stood in front of her, tall, regal, face stitched with shadows. A crown fused into her skull. In her hands, she held the broken phones, the glass, pages, all swirling together like a maelstrom of pain. "You will remember me," the Queen said. "You all will." Rachel woke up alone in her dorm, dirt on her sheets, mud on her feet, and a voice in her head whispering in endless loops. The grave is gone now. Where it once was, there is only cracked, scorched earth and the faint scent of something ancient. Rachel doesn't speak anymore, but at night, her neighbors hear her whispering behind her locked door, in Latin, in Spanish, in dead tongues, words no one taught her. She's remembering, and the Queen is no longer forgotten. Welcome to part 6 of the story, The Ghost Train of Odessa. They say the tracks haven't been in use for decades. The railway that runs through the outskirts of Odessa, Texas, was officially decommissioned in 1974 after a tragic accident killed a dozen railroad workers and engineers during a late-night freight run. Official reports blamed brake failure, but locals whispered a different story, of shadows on the tracks and voices heard over the radio before impact. The wreck was so severe, the train itself was never recovered, swallowed by a sinkhole that appeared without warning. But the tracks remained. Over time, nature tried to reclaim them, shrubs pushing through the gravel, rust eating away at the iron. Yet the locals never dared to tamper with the rails. Let the dead rest, old folks would say. But the dead, it seemed, were far from resting. It began with sightings, faint lights in the distance. A deep rumbling felt beneath the earth, even though no trains were scheduled. Sometimes the sounds came just after midnight. A whistle would echo across the plains, low and mournful, and dogs would howl in response. And then people started disappearing. They were always last seen near the tracks. The dare. In 2022, 5 local teenagers decided to test the legend. Drew, Aaliyah, Marcos, Jesse, and Ben, seniors at Odessa High. Drew had found a rusted rail lantern in his grandfather's shed, who used to work on the line. "Let's bring it," he said. "If the ghosts want to say hi, we should be polite." They picked a Friday night, brought beers, a Bluetooth speaker, and sat on the hill overlooking the tracks around 11:45 p.m. The night was unusually cold for West Texas. The wind stilled. Not even the coyotes called. At 12:09 a.m., the speaker died. No warning. The phone, fully charged moments before, went dark. Then came the sound, far off at first. A low, grinding rumble. "Is that thunder?" Jesse asked. "No," whispered Aaliyah. "That's a train." They all turned to the tracks. There it was. A light, dim and flickering, slowly approaching from west. The sound grew louder, metallic and hollow. The teens stood in stunned silence. The train looked ancient, black iron, soot-streaked, windows aglow with a pale yellow light. There were figures inside, motionless silhouettes sitting in perfect rows, facing forward. Then it stopped, right in front of them. No conductor, no announcement, just the hiss of steam and the slow creak of the passenger doors sliding open. No one moved. Then Ben laughed. "It's a prank. This is some kind of immersive horror stunt. You guys set this up right." He approached the train. Nice, very elaborate. Before anyone could stop him, he stepped aboard. The door closed behind him with a snap. They shouted, pounded on the metal, but the glass showed only the same still passengers. No sign of Ben, no reaction. Then the train began to move again, slowly, deliberately. Drew tried to climb aboard, but it was already too late. It passed by, silent save for the screech of wheels on metal. And then it was gone, vanished into thin air, beyond the bend where the tracks abruptly ended. They called the police. There was a search. No sign of Ben, no tracks, no evidence the train had ever been there. Only the lantern Drew had carried, left behind on the gravel, its glass cracked, its flame flickering blue. The spiral. One by one, the rest of them changed. Jessie started sleepwalking. Her parents found her at 12:09 a.m., standing at the edge of their yard, facing the west where the tracks used to run. Her eyes were open, but glazed over, her lips mouthing something no one could hear. Marcos began sketching, dozens of drawings of the train, passengers, and always one figure at the end of the car, tall, face obscured, holding a lantern identical to Drew's. Aaliyah had dreams of fire and metal, of being crushed between gears, of screams that never ended. Drew began to hear the whistle even during the day. He stopped sleeping. He'd sit by the tracks every night with the lantern, hoping, praying, that Ben would return. But the train never came for them again. Not until Jessie vanished. She was last seen walking barefoot in her pajamas. Security footage caught her stepping off the curb and disappearing mid-stride, as if pulled by an invisible hook. Her phone was found nearby, its final video showing her walking toward the tracks, whispering, "They need another passenger." Marcos followed days later. He left a note that simply read, "I saw the conductor. He knows my name now." His car was found abandoned beside the tracks. The keys were in the ignition. His shoes were missing. His sketchbook was open on the passenger seat. On the final page, he had drawn himself, seated inside the train, staring out the window with empty eyes. The lantern keeper. Drew stayed behind. He kept the lantern close, its flame now cold blue, burning without fuel. Locals said he was obsessed, haunted. He refused to speak of what happened, but every Friday at midnight, he'd walk to the edge of the abandoned line and wait. Sometimes people joined him, curious or skeptical. They never stayed long, because at 12:09 a.m., the whistle always sounded. Low, lonely, and each time, Drew would raise the lantern, its eerie light flickering across the gravel. One night, a drifter joined him. He watched the train appear. He saw the passengers. He even saw one looking back, Ben, now pale and still, dressed in old railway overalls, holding a rusted shovel. When the train departed, the drifter said Drew turned to him and whispered, "They don't want me yet, but they will." The next morning, Drew was gone. Only the lantern remained. Now they say the train still runs, every Friday, sometimes more. Some swear they've seen it even without being near the tracks. In mirrors, in dreams, in the corner of a window at night. The conductor is faceless now, and his train never stops for long. But if it opens its doors to you, don't get on. No one who does ever comes back. Only the lanterns remain, their cold fire burning through the silence of the Texas night. Welcome to part 7 of the story. Ghosts of Texas Soldiers. The desert was still, too still, when Lauren, Miguel, Sadie, and Ethan set out on a road trip across southern Texas. They hadn't planned to veer off the main highway, but a detour through the borderlands promised wide open skies, forgotten trails, and the promise of something different. They were tired of highways and city lights. They wanted to see the real Texas. They didn't expect the silence. There was a stretch of road near Presidio where the GPS lost all signal. No bars, no radio, just an old two-lane highway cutting through endless, sun-baked dust and thorny brush. They passed no other cars, no birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Miguel, who was driving, laughed nervously. "Man, this place is dead." He didn't know how right he was. They passed the remnants of an old adobe fort, just 3 standing walls and a collapsed tower. The ruins were unmarked, absent from any map they'd brought. But Lauren, who'd studied a little Texas history in college, said softly, "This must have been one of the outposts from the early border skirmishes. Mid-1800s, maybe. Mexican-American War era. Should we stop?" Sadie asked. "I mean," Ethan said, pulling out his phone again. "We don't have signal, but sure, let's poke around an abandoned battlefield. What could go wrong?" The fort. They pulled over. The fort was mostly crumbling adobe, with sun-bleached bones of old wooden beams protruding from the dirt. A rusted cannon lay in the corner, its mouth filled with dust and broken mesquite. Carved into the stone were names, barely legible, weathered away by decades of wind and heat. Sadie snapped photos. Miguel whistled through the broken archway. Then they heard it, a deep sigh. It didn't come from any of them. They froze. Lauren's voice cracked. "Did you hear?" Then, faint and far off, came the pop of gunfire. They looked toward the horizon. Nothing. Another shot. Then another. Closer. And over the sound of ghostly gunfire came something worse. The low murmur of men, speaking in urgent Spanish and English, voices layered atop one another in a chaos of history. Desperate, angry dying. The air grew cold. This part of Texas hadn't known rain in weeks. And yet, the wind turned damp, heavy with the scent of gunpowder and sweat. Ethan spun around. "Who's out here? Is this some reenactment group?" But no one answered. Instead, from behind the far wall of the fort, a figure emerged. He wore a tattered uniform. His hat was broad-brimmed, the kind used by Texian volunteers in the 1830s. His chest was marked with blood, but the most chilling part, he had no eyes, just hollow sockets, weeping dust and ash. He lifted a hand as if to speak, but no sound came. Sadie screamed. They bolted to the car. The road that loops. Back in the vehicle, Miguel floored it. Dust trailed behind them. No one spoke for miles. Then Lauren checked the map again and went pale. "This can't be right." "What?" "This is the same road. The GPS is still dead, but look at the tree. We passed that tree already." No way. But they had. The tree in question was unmistakable, a twisted old oak growing from a rocky rise, charred black along one side, as if struck by lightning. They drove for another 10 minutes. There it was again, and this time, the sighing came from inside the car. Ethan reached down, thinking someone had left a window open, but the air was still, hot, yet the sighs grew louder. Long, weary, broken sounds. Then the gunfire returned. Closer. Lauren began to cry softly, rocking in her seat. I read about this. Some believe that places of deep pain, like old battlefields, can trap moments in time. The souls, they don't move on. We're caught in it. Miguel asked, his voice thin. Sadie whispered, I think we're driving through it. The silent charge. At the third pass by the burnt tree, they saw the soldiers. Dozens of them, standing along the ridge. Some wore Texian uniforms, others old Mexican cavalry attire. Some held rifles, others machetes, or nothing at all. But their faces were hollow. Some were missing limbs. One had a bayonet run clear through his chest, swaying slightly in the breeze, though there was no wind. They watched the car go by, and they began to walk. Not run, walk at first, but they picked up speed. Ethan shouted, Go, go, go. Miguel floored again. The car shook. The road cracked beneath the tires. The sighs turned into wails, the gunfire chorus of memory. And then, wham, something slammed onto the hood. A face pressed to the windshield. It was the soldier from the fort. His mouth opened wide, gasping, trying to scream. But he had no tongue. The glass fractured. Then, silence. The escape. The sun was higher in the sky now. The air hot and dry again. No sound. No soldiers. They stopped the car miles later when they spotted a gas station. Modern. Neon open sign flickering weakly. The clerk barely looked up as they stumbled inside. Kids get caught in the loop. Lauren stared. What? The desert loop, he said. Happens sometimes. The land out there, it remembers. Ain't every day the ghosts want company, but sometimes they reach out. Miguel leaned on the counter. You knew about this. The clerk nodded. You're lucky you made it out. Ethan glanced toward the window. What happens to the ones who don't? The clerk paused. Their names carved into the walls of that fort. Look close next time you pass it. Lauren turned pale. We saw them. The clerk shrugged. Some of them were tourists once, like you. They left in silence. The final sound. Back in the car, they didn't talk. But as they drove, Sadie turned on her phone, which had finally rebooted. There was one new recording, an audio file none of them had taken. She pressed play. It was faint but unmistakable. Gunfire, marching boots, a voice in Spanish praying, then a voice in English, broken, hollow. We fought for the land. Now we are the land. The file ended. No one said a word. They didn't take the border route again. In fact, none of them returned to that region. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, Sadie still hears those sighs outside her window. And when she does, she locks her doors, turns off her lights, and listens to the war still echoing through the Texas desert. Welcome to part 8 of the story, The Ghost of the Explorer in Amarillo. The land west of Amarillo stretches endlessly into silence. It was here, amid the yellow grass, dry riverbeds, and stubborn mesas, that Everett Langston made his last stand. A famous explorer in the 1930s, Langston had devoted his life to charting the desolate frontiers of Texas. But during one final solo expedition to uncover lost native trails along the Canadian River, he vanished. His last journal entry, found weeks later at a makeshift camp, simply read, "There is something out here, and it watches." His body was never found. The campground, in the present day, the land is part of a sparsely marked nature preserve. Few visit, fewer stay the night. But Sarah, a grad student in anthropology, had read about Langston. Her thesis centered on forgotten explorers and the legacy they left behind. When she found GPS coordinates believed to mark his last camp, she convinced her friends, Tom, Claire, and Dylan, to join her for a weekend hike. "It's just a story," Dylan said as they unpacked near the dry stream. People get lost in the wild all the time. Claire, checking the overcast sky, muttered, "Still feels weird. I don't like that the ranger didn't even ask for a permit." "They don't," Sarah replied. "Too remote. No one wants to hike out here anymore." By nightfall, their tents were pitched. The wind carried the smell of mesquite and dry earth. Coyotes howled faintly in the distance, but the real weight pressing on them wasn't from nature. It was something unspoken, the feeling that the land had not forgotten. The first night, sometime after midnight, Claire awoke to footsteps. Soft, deliberate. They crunched through the dry grass, just beyond the tent wall. She froze. "Sarah," she whispered. No response. She peeked through the tent flap. A figure stood near the cold fire pit, back turned, dressed in what looked like a long overcoat, wide-brimmed and shadowing the face. The wind didn't touch him. Then he turned his head slowly, just enough for Claire to see the hollow sockets where eyes should have been. She screamed. By the time the others rushed out, the figure was gone. But the prints, old-fashioned boot prints, remained in the dirt. The legend. The next morning, Sarah unearthed the remnants of an old campfire ring, buried under layers of dry soil near their own. Inside were rusted utensils, a shattered compass, and the remnants of what looked like a leather-bound journal page. All it said was, "He comes when the moon is veiled." Sarah's hands trembled. "This is Langston's. It has to be." Tom looked around the empty prairie. "Maybe we should go." But Sarah insisted on staying one more night. "We're documenting history. We have to see this through." That evening, the clouds thickened again. No stars. No moon. The return. Around 2 a.m., Tom was keeping watch by the fire. He'd stayed up intentionally, clutching a flashlight, his eyes darting between the darkened bushes and distant trees. Then he saw it. Across the field, just beyond the light's edge, a figure stood watching. He blinked. Gone. Then closer. At the edge of the camp now. The same wide-brimmed hat. The overcoat. A face mostly lost in shadow. "Who's there?" Tom shouted. No reply. Then came the whisper, carried on the wind. "You follow my trail, but not my warning." Tom stumbled backward, falling onto the fire pit, scattering embers. The others emerged from their tents in chaos, shouting, scanning with lights. Nothing, but Tom swore the man had walked backward into the mist, feet not touching the ground. Trapped. By morning, Sarah's map wouldn't load. Her compass spun uselessly. GPS devices all blinked red or froze entirely. Dylan muttered, "We need to leave." But every direction they tried led them back to the same place. The broken fire ring, the dry creek bed, the remnants of Langston's final night. It was as if the land had sealed itself. "Langston's ghost isn't wandering," Sarah whispered. "He's guarding this place, and we've trespassed." That night, the clouds came early. The wind died, and Everett Langston returned. The confrontation. He came closer this time. His form was clearer, a man half torn by time. His jacket was burned on one side, his chest marked with jagged slashes. His eyes, though hollow, seemed to pulse with faint blue light. He stepped into their circle of lanterns. Sarah stood her ground. "What do you want?" Langston didn't answer in words. Instead, he raised his arm and pointed to the dry creek. Then he faded. They followed his gesture the next morning. There, half buried under a collapsed tree, they found the real campsite, Langston's. Inside a rotted canvas bag was his final journal. The last entry. "I watched the sky blacken. I felt the land shift. Whatever spirit lives here, it's bound to silence. I will not escape. If you find this, return what was lost, and you may yet leave." The offering. Sarah pieced together what Langston meant. Among his belongings was a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a weathered, carved stone with native symbols etched into its face. "A relic," she said. "He took something sacred, and the land cursed him for it." They placed the stone in the dry creek bed, where the earth was softest. That night, the wind returned, and Langston did not. When morning came, the air was lighter. Birds returned. The compass stabilized. They hiked out. No obstacles, no shadows, no whispers. The warning. Back at campus, Sarah submitted her thesis. She included Langston's final entry, but not the details of the ghost. Some truths, she felt, weren't meant for the archives. But every now and then, she receives emails from campers in Amarillo. They write about hearing footsteps on cloudy nights, about seeing a man in an old hat near their fires. He never speaks, but if you've taken something that doesn't belong, he will follow you until it's returned. Welcome to part 9 of the story, Ghostly Presence in the Sam Houston Forest. There are places where the silence seems too thick, where even birds refuse to sing, and every snap of a twig feels like an alarm. Sam Houston National Forest, stretching over 160,000 acres in East Texas, is one of those places. Over the years, stories have spread of disappearances, whispers from the trees, and eyes in the dark. Locals speak of shadowy figures drifting through the underbrush, and hikers who return changed. But for 4 amateur paranormal investigators, the forest was an irresistible challenge. The team, Jamie, passionate documentarian, led the group, with her camcorder always rolling. She dreamed of capturing real evidence of the supernatural. Alongside her were Theo, her skeptical but loyal best friend, Erica, a quiet, sharp-eyed analyst, and Marcus, a thrill-seeker who claimed he once heard voices in a Louisiana swamp. They called themselves the Spirit Trail. In late October, they packed their gear, cameras, and recorders, and hiked deep into the forest. Their destination, a clearing referenced in multiple online accounts, described as the Dead Zone, where electronics fail and shadows move where they shouldn't. The first signs. The hiking was calm at first. Bright sunlight filtered through the pine canopy, and the only sounds were crunching leaves and the occasional squirrel darting through the brush. But about 5 miles in, things shifted. The forest grew unnaturally quiet. No wind, no birds. Theo pointed it out first. You hear that? Nothing. Then came the smells, brief but sharp. Smoke, rotting wood, and something metallic. Erica, scanning the tree line, said quietly, "Something's watching us." Jamie dismissed it. "Let's get to the clearing before sunset." But the woods weren't finished with them. The clearing. They reached the clearing as the last light faded. It was circular, unnaturally perfect, and strangely barren in the center, like nothing had grown there in years. Jamie set up the cameras, while Marcus wandered toward the tree line. That's when he saw the first figure, a woman barely visible in the fading light, standing just beyond the last row of trees. Pale, motionless, her hair hung down over her face. He blinked, and she was gone. "Jamie," he said, returning quickly. "There's someone out there." They reviewed the footage. One camera caught a faint blur, too quick, too distorted to be anything conclusive. But then came the audio. On Theo's recorder, buried beneath their own chatter, was a whisper. "Leave this place." They all heard it. None of them laughed. The night, they set up camp anyway. A small fire crackled in the center of the clearing, casting long shadows on the nearby trees. Just after midnight, sounds began. Distant chanting, footsteps circling the camp. Then came the tapping, like fingers brushing the outside of their tents, always moving, never stopping. Theo stepped out first, armed with a flashlight. Nothing. Then Marcus screamed. They rushed to his tent. He was trembling, wide-eyed. She was inside. She crouched at the foot of my sleeping bag, staring. Long fingers, hollow eyes. She didn't move until I blinked. Jamie's camcorder, left on the tripod, had shut off. The battery had been full. The shadows. The next morning, Erica pointed to tracks around the camp. Barefoot, human-sized, dozens of them, but they had seen no one. As they packed to leave, the woods resisted. Paths they'd taken and were gone. Trees seemed wrong, angled slightly inward, trunks marked with deep gashes like claws. Their compass spun. GPS flickered. Then they began to see the shadows, not out of the corners of their eyes, but right in front of them. Figures moved between the pines, some tall, some crawling, none with faces. At one point, Jamie screamed and dropped to her knees. She claimed hands had reached out of a hollow tree and pulled at her mind. Not her body, her mind. Theo grabbed her. of getting out. Now, they moved, without direction, for hours. The mirror tree. Eventually, they came upon a peculiar pine, twisted, blackened, with bark polished like glass. When they approached it, their reflections warped. Erica gasped. Her reflection smiled, but she didn't. Then came the voices again, closer, clearer. They walked because no one remembers. You brought fire. Now bring silence. Marcus, panicking, threw his flashlight at the tree. A piercing scream erupted from the forest. Not human, not animal. Something old and furious. They ran. The escape. Just before dusk, they stumbled upon an old trail marker, faded and cracked, but real. Following it blindly, they eventually emerged near a ranger road. No one spoke until they were miles away. Jamie checked the footage. Most of it was corrupted. One clip remained, a brief shot from the clearing, where a pale face, impossibly tall, peered from behind a tree, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They never returned. The aftermath. Jamie published their story online, but disguised the location. She never wanted others to find that clearing. Theo left the group and hasn't spoken of that night since. Marcus moved to Alaska. Erica kept researching. She discovered legends from local native tribes, warnings about a forest that remembers, where the dead walk when disturbed. Spirits not of individuals, but of forgotten pain. Collective anguish rooted in soil and silence. Some believe the Sam Houston forest is more than haunted. They say it's alive, and if you walk deep enough, long enough, it might notice you. Welcome to part 10 of the story. The Whispering Tree of Austin. Just off a quiet residential street on the eastern edge of Austin stands an ancient oak tree, twisted and towering, its gnarled limbs reaching toward the sky like frozen arms in torment. Locals call it the Widow's Tree, though no one quite agrees on where the name came from. But everyone agrees on one thing. There is something wrong with it. Even in broad daylight, the air around the tree is colder, noticeably so. Animals avoid it. Children cross the street to walk on the other side. And at night, when the breeze rustles the leaves, some say you can hear her. The woman trapped inside, still breathing, still waiting. The story begins. Aaron Thompson had heard the rumors. As a folklore graduate student at the University of Texas, she'd grown fascinated with haunted sites and urban legends around Austin. She planned her thesis around the most persistent supernatural claims in the area, and the Widow's Tree was her final and most reluctant stop. She visited during the day, notebook in hand, armed with a small digital recorder. The first thing she noticed was the silence. No insects, no birds. The second was the cold. On a warm October afternoon, the air near the tree felt like winter. Still, she approached and pressed her palm to the bark. It was warm. No, hot. Startled, she pulled away. And as she did, just for a second, she thought she heard something behind her sigh. Faint and sorrowful. She turned. No one was there. That night, she listened back to the recorder. Between the ambient wind and her own breathing, a new sound emerged, a whisper. Come closer. The legend. According to scattered archives and second-hand tales, the tree stood beside a cottage in the 1800s, owned by a woman named Margaret Bellamy. Widowed young, she lived alone, a quiet seamstress who kept to herself. One night, during a particularly violent storm, neighbors heard screaming from her cottage. When they arrived, the house was ablaze, and Margaret was never seen again. Some said her lover had returned to kill her. Others whispered that she had summoned something she could not control. All that remained was the tree. Over time, the ground swallowed the foundation of her home, and the tree grew unnaturally large. Locals began to avoid it. One boy who carved his name into its bark fell ill and died days later. Another man tried to cut a limb and was found hanging from it the next morning, an apparent suicide. The city tried to remove the tree multiple times. Chainsaws failed to penetrate it. Workers fell sick. One man went blind for a week. Eventually, they stopped trying. Aaron's obsession. Aaron returned to the tree each night for a week, setting up cameras, motion sensors, and audio equipment. Every night, something strange occurred. Batteries drained within minutes. Cameras turned off, then turned back on facing a different direction. Audio recordings were filled with static, and in the static were voices, pleading, whispering, sobbing. Erin didn't tell anyone. She wanted answers. Then, on the 8th night, something changed. While reviewing footage, she found a brief clip, only a second long. Her own camera, facing the tree, had captured a figure standing beneath it. A woman, long dress, barefoot, her head tilted upward as though listening. As Erin leaned in to look closer, her computer shut off. When it rebooted, the clip was gone. The encounter. That night, she returned to the tree alone. No gear, no notebook, just herself, and the feeling that something unfinished needed closure. "I know you're there," she said quietly, standing beneath the canopy of branches. The moonlight barely touched the ground. "I know what they did to you." The wind picked up, leaves rustled, then whispers, not in her ears, but in her mind. I remember the fire, the hands, the screaming." Erin staggered back, her breath visible in the sudden chill. Shadows moved between the trees. A hand brushed her shoulder, though no one was behind her, and then she saw her, standing by the base of the tree, eyes empty, skin pale like paper. "Margaret." She mouthed something Erin couldn't hear, then vanished. The warning. Erin awoke the next morning in her bed, with no memory of walking home. Her boots were caked with mud, and a single acorn sat on her pillow. She tried to return to the tree later that week, but the street had changed. The tree was still there, but where once it stood alone on a small lot, now a new construction crew had fenced it off. Workers were building a luxury duplex. She shouted at them to stop, warned them. They laughed her off. Within 2 weeks, 2 of the workers quit after strange accidents. One man went missing. Another began screaming in his sleep and was hospitalized. Construction halted. The fence remained. The aftermath. Erin published her thesis, but omitted the final chapter. She kept the audio files locked on a drive she never opened again. She moved to Oregon, but some nights, when she's alone and the wind picks up, she hears the whisper again. Come closer. And she remembers the feeling, the warmth of the bark, the cold in the air, and the woman who still stands beneath that ancient oak waiting. Epilogue. Today, if you walk past a certain residential street in East Austin, you might notice the house numbers skip one, where a home should be. There's only a tree, older than the city, and if you pause, just for a second, and stand close enough to its twisted trunk, you might feel a chill pass through your bones. And if you're very, very unlucky, you might hear her call your name.